The economy is never a wild forest growing of its own accord. It is a machine, hard-coded, controlled step by step by shadow architects, central banks, mega corporations, and the invisible hands moving the world's wealth. Welcome to the channel where uncomfortable truths are quietly examined. Most people believe the economy is like the weather, unpredictable, natural, something that just happens to us. They talk about market forces as if they were gravity or the tides, but they are wrong. The economy is not a wild forest. It is a laboratory, a highly controlled, sterile environment where every variable is calibrated, every organic rise in the stock market, every unforeseen crash. These are not accidents of nature. They are outcomes. You see, in a real forest, the trees don't ask for permission to grow. But in this laboratory, the trees only grow when the architects decide to turn on the lights. And right now, the lights are being manipulated to favor a very specific group of people. To understand how they do it, we first have to look at the very first drop of artificial blood they pump into the system, the beginning of the cycle. When the economy slows down, the architects don't just print money and drop it from helicopters over your backyard. That would be too honest. Instead, they use a surgical strike known as the Cantillon Effect. Think of it as a fresh supply of blood entering a body. It doesn't reach the toes and the fingers at the same time. The heart gets it first. In our world, the heart consists of the big banks, the mega corporations, and the government's inner circle. They receive this new, cheap money before the rest of the world even knows it exists. They use it to buy up real assets, stocks, real estate, gold. At today's prices, by the time that money finally trickles down to your paycheck, it has already lost its magic. Why? Because the very act of pumping it has already driven prices through the roof. The insiders get the wealth. You get the inflation. It is a silent tax, a theft of time, disguised as economic stimulus. But to keep this theft going, they need you to participate. They need you to feel rich, even when you are being bled dry. And that brings us to the most effective lure ever created, the low-interest trap. To keep the laboratory running, the architects need a fuel that never runs out. That fuel is your debt. When they lower interest rates, they aren't helping the middle class. They are setting the bait. Suddenly, the American dream looks affordable again. The media begins its symphony. Mortgage rates at historic lows. Don't miss out on the housing boom. Zero down financing for everyone. Think about a guy in Ohio. Let's call him Mark. Mark sees the news. He sees his neighbors buying new SUVs. He's told that money is cheap. So he signs for a $500,000 mortgage and a 60-month car loan. Mark feels wealthy. He feels like he's winning. But Mark doesn't realize that he hasn't bought a home. He has sold 30 years of his future labor back to the system for a price that was artificially inflated by the very same cheap money he just borrowed. In the United States, we don't have debtors' prisons anymore. We have something more efficient, 30-year fixed-rate chains. They keep you working, they keep you quiet, and most importantly, they keep you from looking up to see who is holding the other end of the leash. Because while you are celebrating your new debt, the architects are already building a cage made of invisible walls. Once the system is flooded with cheap money and the bait has been swallowed, the architects face a new problem. They need to make sure the money doesn't leave the laboratory. If you realize your dollars are losing value, your first instinct is to run, to buy gold, to move your wealth into foreign currencies, to find a trapdoor out of the system. But the door is already locked. They build invisible walls to keep your capital hostage. With gold, They create monopolies. They make it difficult to buy, risky to hold, and tax it so heavily that profit becomes a ghost. They want you to look at gold and see a burden, not a life raft. And then, there is the currency. They restrict the flow. They create a gap between the price they tell you and the price you actually pay in the shadows. It's a clever psychological game. If they make the exit too expensive, you will choose to stay in the burning house just because the door is made of gold. They don't need to steal your money if they can simply make it impossible to spend anywhere else. You are not a customer. You are a prisoner of the currency. And as these walls close in, the temperature inside begins to rise. The euphoria of cheap money is fading, and the architects are reaching for the master switch. Every party has a moment, right before the music stops, where the host quietly walks to the back of the room and puts a hand on the master switch. The architects have seen enough. The economy is overheating. In plain English, the common people have started to get too comfortable. But notice carefully. The switch isn't flipped for everyone at the same time. Before the public announcement, before the headlines scream about rate hikes, the commercial banks receive a silent signal. They begin to clean their house while your front door is still wide open. They quietly adjust their portfolios. They tighten their lending requirements. They withdraw the margin from the speculators. They are the ones who invited you to the party. And now, they are the first ones sneaking out through the fire exit. By the time you see the news on your phone, by the time the experts tell you to be cautious, the big money has already moved to higher ground. The scale is tipping. The cheap money you were promised is about to become the most expensive mistake of your life, because the architects are no longer trying to keep the lights on. They are preparing for the big squeeze. The air in the room is getting thin. The architects call it tightening. But for you, it feels like suffocation. First, they raise the interest rates. The cheap money that built your world now becomes a hungry predator. Your mortgage resets. Your credit card debt swells. The SUV in your driveway starts to feel like a ball and chain. But they don't stop at the interest. They introduce the hidden taxes, the fees you didn't see coming. Registration costs rise. Transfer taxes on your property skyrocket. They are harvesting the remaining liquidity from the pockets of the middle class without ever having to pass a new law in Congress. And then comes the betrayal of the narrative. The same news anchors who told you to buy the dip 6 months ago now look at the camera with a straight face and warn you about irrational exuberance. They tell you that a recession is necessary. That's your loss. Is for the greater good of the economy. They are gaslighting an entire nation while the commercial banks lock their vaults. The goal isn't to fix the economy. The goal is to starve the weak until they are forced to sell the only things they have left. Because a market that is gasping for air is a market that is ready for the ultimate harvest. In the laboratory, this is what we call the harvest. While the headlines scream about economic tragedy, the architects are quietly setting the table. You see, crises are not meant to destroy wealth. They are meant to redistribute it. Think of the small business owner in Detroit, or the tech startup in Austin. They built their dreams on the cheap blood of the first cycle. Now, with the air cut off, they are bleeding out. Revenue is a ghost. Debts are a mountain. They are forced to sell, not because they want to, but because they must survive. And this is where the vultures appear, the mega corporations and the private equity giants, the ones who sat on mountains of cash while you were spending yours. They move in now. They don't buy businesses. They collect carcasses. They buy your life's work for 20 cents on the dollar. They snap up real estate portfolios from families who can no longer breathe under their mortgages. They aren't saving the market. They are consolidating power. By the time the dust settles, the middle class has been pruned like an overgrown hedge. The wealth hasn't vanished. It has simply moved into fewer, colder hands. The world is now silent. The panic is gone. Only the zombies remain. Welcome to the graveyard. The panic is over. The screaming has stopped. In its place is a heavy, suffocating silence. This is the zombie market. The public is no longer angry. They are numb. They have watched their portfolios vanish. Their homes lose value, and their dreams get put on hold. Now, they simply don't care anymore. They aren't selling. They aren't buying. They are just waiting for the end. But here's the great paradox. In the laboratory, this silence is the most beautiful sound the architects can hear. When the news tells you the market is dead, the insiders know it's finally safe to go shopping. They love bad news now. Another bankruptcy? Good. More assets to absorb. High unemployment? Perfect. Labor is becoming cheap again. The public sees a corpse. The architects see fertilizer. They are quietly planting the seeds for the next forest. They aren't making a sound. No hype, no flashy headlines. Just a cold, calculated accumulation while you are looking the other way. The bottom isn't a price. The bottom is a feeling. It's the feeling that it will never, ever get better again. And that feeling is the final signal to start the engine for a new world. The engine is turning over slowly, quietly. The architects are finishing their harvest, and they are preparing to flip the switch back to growth. But you are no longer the person who entered this laboratory 10 minutes ago. You've seen the wires behind the walls. You've seen the invisible blood pumping through the heart of the system. And you now understand that the American dream is a script written by someone else. The lesson is simple, yet brutal. In this system, you are either the architect or you are the building material. The next cycle is coming. The money will get cheap again. The media will sing its siren song again, and the masses will rush back into the cage, hoping that this time it will be different. It won't be. But you have a choice. Stop watching the weather and start studying the machine. Don't fight the cycle. Learn to breathe while others are suffocating. The game doesn't change, only the players do. Stay vigilant. The lights are about to turn back on. Welcome to the few who can finally see in the dark.